And I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.
At the outset of our statement, we wish to convey our condolences to the Islamic Republic of Iran in connection with the railway disaster today, which killed people. President, on the 26th of May, at the UN Security Council, Russia voted against the draft resolution on the DPRK prepared by the United States. During the following open meeting, we explained in details our reasons for doing so, which are available to all UN member states. We're prepared to repeat them again. Primarily, we wish to note that our American colleagues ignored our repeated explanations. Those were given during the process of consultations on their draft. We said that we did not support a document that provided for new sanctions against the DPRK, which would further worsen the complex humanitarian situation in the country. We called for changing the draft resolution into a format that would be acceptable for many members of the UN Security Council. We wanted it to be a statement of the Security Council President, and unfortunately, these proposals fell on deaf ears. Thus, we proposed the only possibility of agreeing on a consensus-based document in the Council, and that proposal was rejected. The situation has emerged not 10 and not 20 days ago. In principle, we've repeatedly said that introducing new sanctions against the DPRK would be a dead end. In 2006, on the US's initiative, Pyongyang was subjected to a large number of restrictive measures, one more restrictive than the next. However, over the years, we can now see that the sanctions paradigm has failed to guarantee security in the region, nor has it moved us any further toward settling the nuclear missile non-proliferation issues. Quite the contrary. In the last year, we've only seen a worsening of the situation on the peninsula. Our Western colleagues are accustomed to shifting all the blame onto the North Korean authorities. However, they're completely ignoring the fact that the repeated calls by Pyongyang to the U.S. to stop its hostile activities, which would open up space for dialogue, that these calls were not taken seriously. What we've heard from our American colleagues is the need for new sanctions only. Pyongyang in 2018 and 2019 took steps, accommodating steps. It sent positive signals, yet these were constantly doubted. The Security Council was unable to find the strength to respond to them appropriately and to foster the process of easing tensions through reducing the sanctions pressures on Pyongyang as measures that could have stimulated further accommodating steps. Thus, the Security Council sanctions against the DPRK, unfortunately, have remained a thing in itself, as Kant put it. They have not become a tool that would allow for a flexible response to developments on the peninsula. Alternatives to political and diplomatic settlement, including the Russia-Chinese draft humanitarian resolution, were rejected, and now we are reaping the fruits of this short-sighted policy of the West. Ramping up the sanctions pressure on Pyongyang is futile, but not only that, it's extremely dangerous when it comes to the humanitarian fallout such measures could have. There is a package of sanctions that was adopted against Pyongyang in 2016 and 2017. It primarily hit the lives of ordinary North Koreans. Even before the pandemic, the country had a serious deficit of medications and medical equipment. The economy was languishing. The bank and financial restrictions had virtually cut North Koreans off from the ability to purchase consumer goods. Agriculture also suffered. It was deprived of equipment and fertilizer. We stress that all of this started even before the country closed down in the face of the threat of the proliferation of the novel coronavirus in 2020. Unfortunately, this disease did end up entering the DPRK a few weeks ago. The epidemiological situation there now is extremely complex. At a time when North Koreans are encountering a challenge which should actually bring us to find ways to assist the country to help it overcome it. In this situation, our American colleagues are proposing the introduction of new sanctions. That's completely irresponsible. In this regard, we're convinced that the relevance of broadening humanitarian exemptions to sanctions measures, we propose this, and our colleagues from China have proposed it as well. This relevance has only increased. Anyone who is seriously addressing the North Korean problem has long understood that it's futile to expect Pyongyang to unconditionally disarm under the threat of a spiral of sanctions. The creation of new military blocs in the region, such as the formation of the US, Great Britain, and Australia, cast serious doubt on the good intentions of these countries. Pyongyang has such doubts as well, and these measures are counterproductive when it comes to establishing dialogue. There have been threats against Pyongyang from the American administration. We've heard such threats regularly. On the whole, we can see that the primacy of political and diplomatic settlement of the conflict has been paralyzed. That's happening all over the world. Preventive diplomacy is something that many member states, including the US, like to exalt, yet it's being hurled aside when we're talking about countries that are not acknowledged to belong to the so-called civilized world. It seems that our American and other Western colleagues have had a crisis of genre. They don't have any response to crisis situations other than introducing sanctions. Russia has always viewed this measure, which is taken solely by the Security Council, as the most extreme measure. It requires constant fine-tuning and calibration. We're not talking about unilateral sanctions. For example, those on the DPRK, inter alia. These also make it impossible to implement Security Council resolutions, which saps our ability to respond collectively on the basis of the UN Charter. I wish to stress that Russia opposes any military activities which imperil the security of the Korean Peninsula and countries of northeastern Asia. However, the problem of security, which directly bears on our country and others, cannot be resolved through the primitive use of the sanctions club, which has serious collateral effects. We are convinced that the search for mutually acceptable political and diplomatic solutions is the only way forward toward a peaceful settlement of the problem on the Korean Peninsula and toward the formation in northeastern Asia of lasting security mechanisms, only involving all players in the region on equal footing in a settlement, rather than attempts to monopolize this process, will yield results. This is precisely what should be our main task. Resolving this task will allow us to normalize the situation in the region. That said, we wish to note that a lack of progress on the political track risks further stoking tensions on the peninsula, which unfortunately we are already seeing. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation.